Geoffrey Templeton returns to Budapest to find the woman he loves dead in a peasant cottage. Her hand is still closed around a single chess piece, a white knight, positioned as if to save a king from check. In the logic of the game, the knight moves obliquely, stepping around the pieces arranged against it to find an opening. While this image opens a work of fiction, it was written as a direct response to a real-world revolution. The book appeared in October 1920, just as the ink was drying on the treaties that stripped Hungary of 2/3 of its territory. The author was a 20-year-old named Bruce Graham. He looked at the news reports coming out of the smoldering Hungarian capital and forged a vigilante hero to make sense of the violence. British readers, returning home from their own service in the Great War, were hungry for this kind of story. Early thrillers served as a mechanism for people trying to process the strange, violent new world the war had left behind. The conflict in the novel was born from the geopolitical vacuum created by the sudden collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. As international delegates gathered in formal rooms to carve up the map, the new Hungarian Republic found itself besieged by territorial demands from every neighbor. When the Western powers refused to restrain these demands, the liberal government resigned in despair. That political surrender allowed radicalism to take root almost instantly. Power passed to the Hungarian Communist Party under Béla Kun. A former journalist who had been personally tutored by Lenin in Russia, Kun was dispatched to Hungary as an agent of the Comintern to establish a Soviet republic. His regime lasted exactly 133 days, characterized by the nationalization of all property and a food rationing system that led to severe shortages. The government printed its own Soviet banknotes, but the peasantry refused to accept them, leaving the city starving. Order was maintained by the Lenin Boys, a paramilitary Red Guard commanded by the sailor Joseph Czerny. They were empowered to arrest, torture, and execute class enemies without trial, throwing victims into the Danube or using armored trains to conduct political repression. For readers in 1920, these events weren't history, they were the morning news. Kun's regime was an immediate threat to the European status quo, and the public looked to fiction for a savior who could navigate the chaos. Geoffrey Templeton becomes that savior, transforming into a masked avenger known as the White Knight. However, Graham depicts this vigilantism as a form of controlled suicide. Templeton arrives in Budapest with nothing to live for, seeking a purpose that justifies the daily risk of his life. He engages in high-stakes rescue operations, specifically targeting the armored trains the regime used to transport political prisoners. These missions require the kind of English calmness that Graham's audience found deeply reassuring. Templeton's campaign targets the psychology of the regime, leaving calling cards for real historical figures like Tibor Somwili, Kun's deputy for internal security. This harassment threw the actual Workers' Council into fits of paranoia. While Templeton fights the regime, his primary adversary is Detective Gunsey. Graham portrays Gunsey as a man of professional integrity, a rigorous detective who hunts the White Knight out of a sense of duty, rather than political loyalty to his masters. This elevates the story beyond a simple political pamphlet. It becomes an exploration of a broken man finding a reason to keep going by risking his life against a worthy opponent. Templeton eventually meets Elizabeth, a sharp and courageous captive who complicates his mission. Her presence disrupts his trajectory toward a purposeful death, forcing him to engage with the reality of survival. The tension peaks during a scene of dramatic irony, where Elizabeth unwittingly denounces the White Knight to Templeton himself, unaware that the man she loves is the very vigilante she is criticizing. Their romance develops under the constant pressure of totalitarianism. In place of traditional courtship, they navigate shared danger and conversations held in the shadow of potential informers. Elizabeth's influence shifts the stakes of the novel. Templeton is no longer looking for a meaningful way to end his life. He is looking for a way to survive the revolution for the sake of someone else. Because Graham wrote with such speed, he captured the specific, humiliating degradations of the Red Terror, the worthless currency, the smell of the Danube, and fear of the Lenin Boys, while they were still fresh in the public mind. He took the aristocratic rescuer template established by the Scarlet Pimpernel and updated it for a harder century. Graham's Budapest is not an operatic backdrop, it is a real place suffering under a documented terror. Graham eventually became a staple of British popular fiction with the Blackshirt series. Those later books established him as a dependable craftsman, but they lacked the raw, journalistic anger of his 19-year-old self. The Trail of the White Knight serves as an evolutionary link in the thriller genre. It bridges the gap between the romantic adventures of the Edwardian era and the cynical, politically complex world of later writers like Eric Ambler. That chess piece remains the novel's central emblem. It was passed from a dying hand to a grieving man, becoming a symbol of everything that might be salvaged from a catastrophe: identity, purpose, and a reason to survive. This novel endures because Graham took the chaos of a collapsing empire and turned it into a manageable narrative. For an audience facing a violent new reality, he provided a story where courage and strategic moves could still produce a sense of justice.